So with that, you've went through the quest, the habit of ferocity. You've learned how to work on grit. You've understand how to stack all the right triggers to make you have the right goals, the right motivation to be ferocious in everything that you do. And we've touched a little bit about flow states, but we kind of kept it at a surface level. And that was not by accident. See, the thing with flow, as you'll learn quickly with Steven, is that there's a lot of nuances to it where the foundation needs to be in place. Once you have the foundation of ferocity, you already would have noticed some crazy things happen in your life where you're able to accomplish tasks, keep that focus, have that commitment. And now we want to talk about what does it mean to have access to flow states. And so with that, the expert around flow states, Steven Kotler, is with us now, and we're going to go deep into the topic. Steven, welcome to the call, and thank you for your time with us here.
Jason, it's great to be with you. It's great to be with everybody. Thank you guys for jumping in. 3 o'clock in the morning, Kate, you're a trooper.
Beast mode. So, Steven, I really wanted to open this right up. And one of the questions that we were just talking before the call is the fact that, you've been teaching flow states for so many years, but here we actually talked about habit of ferocity. Why was it that we decided to have people go through a habit of ferocity before even jumping into flow states?
Yeah, I think that's the core question. And this is really it was one of the really kind of surprising findings over the past 10 years and, training up over 100,000 people in this stuff is peak performers, people at the top of their game. When you train them up in flow, they've got certain things, habits in place that they're doing, and they can hold on to flow, and it really accelerates their lives. What we started to notice is the vast majority of people would go through a flow course. They would get a huge spike immediately afterwards, and then there'd be a significant return to baseline over time. And we started trying to figure out, well, what the hell's going on? Why isn't this lasting? And what we started to realize is people who didn't have foundational cognitive high performance, so motivation, grit, and goal setting, that foundation in place tended to blow themselves up in the flow work. Flow is a massive turbo boost, right? It's a huge accelerant in productivity, in creativity, in learning, etc., in meaning, in joy, in purpose, and life satisfaction. All those things go crazy. But it's also not a sustainable state, right? It goes up and comes down, comes up and comes down. And when it goes away, if you don't have those grit skills, for example, laid into place, you're going to get your ass kicked. You're really going to struggle. And if your motivation isn't perfectly stacked, if all the intrinsic motivation isn't there, flow is going to accelerate you incredibly. And then when you hit a wall, right, without all those components in place, it's going to feel terrible because flow is this incredible high and suddenly you get dropped. And if you don't have those basic skills, what do I do every day? How do I keep marching forward? You're not going to be able to keep going. And flow is essentially, I know I'm talking for a while, but there's a lot to say on this. It's a path to mastery, right? And so there's a lot of heavy skill acquisition. There's a lot of struggle along the way. The habit of ferocity isn't the beginning of this. It's just the beginning of the struggle, right? The struggle is going to continue. So will the acceleration. What starts to really get layered in now is deep meaning, right? Things to really start to snap into place and everything kind of turbos together. So that's why the programs were designed this way. And it was totally built as a stack. Habit of ferocity is where to start. 0 to dangerous is our flow training. Though I will say 0 to dangerous is something of a misnomer, because if you haven't actually laid in the habit of ferocity, if I start you at 0, I can get you dangerous, but you may end up blowing your life up on the back end.
Okay, so that does sound dangerous. Now, I wanted to ask you, for someone, because you've trained many people, what does that look like if you don't have that habit of ferocity? And if I could be so bold as to make an assumption, I feel like, a lot of people do the shiny object syndrome kind of chase. Like if you're an entrepreneur and you go into one thing and then you get excited because it's new and novel, and then you kind of lose momentum and then you feel kind of down and you have to go to the next thing. Is that an example of what happened?
So let me speak, because this is one of the first places I started to see it. Startups at every level are great at they're great flow state generators, right? There's a lot of passion, there's a lot of motivation, there's a lot of flow triggers built into startups. And I've been involved, I think I've helped start 23 kind of successful enterprises. I can't tell you how many other things have failed along the way, but 23 things where I've been kind of foundational. A lot of them were magazines that I helped start along the way. But usually the difference between success and failure is the third problem, right? You're really high. You start a company. It's going great. It's going great. Oh, the first problem shows up. Oh, it's hard, but we're in this together. This is great. We're going to solve it. And it usually tends to be a little harder than you thought it was going to be, right? It's a little more debilitating. And then right on its heels is a second problem. And that's where you start to see attrition. That's where usually the team gets a little smaller at that point. But people still dig in because they're in it for the long haul. And then you get to the third problem, which quickly follows the second problem. And by this point, there's usually 2 people left in the company and everybody else has fled. And it's because the flow got turned off. They didn't have grit and motivation layered in, right? People joined the company and maybe the company wasn't at the intersection of 4 or 5 different curiosities. It was just one curiosity. Oh, I'm kind of curious about Bitcoin. Maybe I'll just jump into this, right? And it wasn't layered into like, those things were dovetailed. So by the time you get to the third problem, you're screwed. And if you don't have the grit skills, you're triply screwed. And if you don't have all kinds of long-term goals, right? The three different levels of goal setting. I'm sorry, this screen just did something very strange to me, and I'm now viewing somebody else's screen. Thank you. Now I can't hear you, Jace. You muted.
Yeah, unmuting myself usually helps. Omer, I don't know why you went ahead and shared your screen, but it kind of interrupted our flow of conversation. But I want to get right back into it. Whereas that, okay, you have that be witnessed, but when those startups like get that kind of excitement, is that what a flow state is, or is there more to it?
So that's a really interesting question. And the truthful, honest answer is, every case is going to be different and we don't know, and every individual is going to be different. But what you're really asking is questions about what is the difference between a dopamine high and a flow state, right? And because you'll see a lot of people, mania is a false flow, right? Speed, crystal meth, all these are norepinephrine driven things. Also false flow. Cocaine produces a false flow. And this is like, if you've ever spent time around people like cocaine, they think they're genius and ideas leading to idea, and you listen to them and you're like, oh my God, shut up. And you're going in circles. You're saying the same thing over and over again. There's a difference between dopamine and flow. And startups will produce a lot of dopamine. Novelty, complexity, unpredictability, these are all dopamine triggers. And these are huge spikes in dopamine. But the problem, and this is one of the long-term problems with flow, that dopamine high is really, cocaine is the most addictive drug on earth. And all it does is spike dopamine in the brain and block its reuptake. So you're dealing with a very addictive substance, and we are hardwired for it. And it also underpins learning. So it feels like we're getting smarter, even if we're not getting smarter. This is a problem. This shows up if you've read David Epstein's new book, Range, on learning. There's a different students who seem really good in the classroom and they're just answering everything versus students who really struggle in the classroom. If you test them a couple months later, the students who were in the classroom doing really well, often they were being led by the teacher and they were riding a dopamine high, and there's no long-term learning. The struggle seems to cement the learning on the back end. There's a whole bunch of new stuff in learning theory that's sort of looking at this exact problem. We're nowhere with it in the long term, but it comes up a lot. So I think startups are great at producing dopamine. Turning dopamine into flow is more complicated. There's a lot more things that go on, and flow dopamine is one out of a myriad of things that happen in the brain. But it can be difficult to distinguish, and this is exactly where people get into trouble. Without the habit of ferocity, right? If you don't have your motivation perfectly lined up and you know what your goals are and you know where you're going, right? You're going to chase the high. You're going to get derailed by the high. You're going to do exactly what you said. Oh, there's no more high. I got to go find the next thing because I need more high. Instead of saying, no. The real high is what happens if I stay on task and stay on goal for years at end, driving forward and turbo boosting with flow along the way. That's right. If you talk to people about, very rarely are people proud of things that just happen to them. Right? We're proud of things we work for. We're proud of things we earn. You can't lie to the brain. If you just sort of get lucky, if you've ever met people who were born with a lot of natural athletic talent and just sort of they got genetically lucky, right? Once they get out of college, their lives tend to fall apart for a while because they're no longer genetically lucky, right? They weren't lucky enough to go pro, and now they've ridden it as far as they can go. And now what the hell do I do? Because there's nothing, they don't know what to do there, right? See that a lot too.
Yeah, and what I want to do is just for everybody listening, like this whole conversation fascinates me. And if you have any questions you want to ask, which is a follow-up to your habit of ferocity or things that you notice in your own progress of habit of ferocity or things related to flow, do use the chat to ask away. I've already seen the comments here. We got Gautam talking about, witnessing this with the early stage of startups. I want to bring one that's more controversial because it's very close to my industry. Stephen, I used to work in it was like real estate investment seminars, and I would notice these people that would come and they would be ready to buy, like they would always want to buy things to go to the next level. And there was a term for it, and I called it seminar junkie. And it was like going to these seminars that go like rah, so that you feel so charged up. But is that a scalable way? Is that even considered flow? Is
Yeah,
that again dope?
so this to me, at the Flow Research Collective, we have a foundational idea that everything we do is built on, which is the idea that personality doesn't scale, biology scales. Look, if personality scaled, right? If I could train you in what worked for me, we'd all be skiing through the trees at 50 miles an hour, listening to hip hop at top volume, stoned out of our minds, right? Like that's what works for me when I need to shut my brain off and really reset. That's what I do. If I was training, like how long do you think that would last? And what I tell you about this is deep personal experience learned the hard way. Everybody who learns anything about peak performance, usually about 3 to 5 years in, right around the time they start to get a little dangerous, they start trying to tell everybody everything they know, right? And train other people. I did the same thing in my early 30s. I had spent about 3 years researching flow, working on the science. And I destroyed lives. I mean, somebody went to the hospital. I nearly caused a divorce among people who are still happily married today. You blah, blah, blah. Why? Personality doesn't scale. Biology scales. Biology is what evolution designed to scale. So when we work with flow, even in high performance, you walk into a bookstore today, you look around the self-help, peak performance, take your pick section. Where the hell would you start? Like what? It doesn't even make sense how it's organized. Do you do goals? Do you do motivation? Do you do confidence? Do you do the power of habit? Do you do the power of now? Do you do the 47 laws of the power of habit and the power? Where the hell do you go, right? Biology scales, and evolution designed the brain for flow, right? It's how we perform at our best. And there are certain systems that get amplified in flow. Motivation, learning, and creativity more than anything else. Why does the habit of ferocity start with motivation? Because you're going to get a huge boost. You're going to get a lot of dopamine, right? And you're going to have to be able to stabilize it. Otherwise, you're going to produce those seminar junkies. Otherwise, that's what this is, right? Seminar junkies, you go to a Tony Robbins seminar, he's going to get you high as a kite, pump a ton of dopamine through your system, probably put a bunch of people into group flow as well, right? He's playing but it's not sustainable over time. It's a huge high. You come back, you crash. Some people, the people who are already peak performers, know how to stabilize it. They've got the habit of ferocity laid in, and they can do something with that energy, and it is useful, and they build, which is why he can sell $100,000 platinum memberships, right? Like it works for some people, but for most people, it doesn't work that way. And they come back, there's this huge crash, and they want to run to their next seminar. You see the same thing with meditation retreats. You see the same thing with everything else. One of the things that and the industry, the model is built on like day-to-day lifelong coaching, right? Like that's the model. And nothing we know about learning human performance works that way. Like you did the habit of ferocity. Hopefully there was a bunch of time off afterwards. These things are cemented in. Okay, there's one more thing we can do, zero to dangers. And there's a class on top of that, but that's the full stack of like human peak performance. That's all the biology shows. There's a couple of things we can start training on the outsides of that, but it's really like, it's not a lifelong anything. It's a set of chunk skills, and you need to go one to the next because there's stages of progression, right? And it looks like their paradigm shifts along the way. So until you get to the next level up, you can't even see the stuff that you're missing. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I want you to elaborate on one thing that you say personality doesn't scale, biology does. What exactly do you mean? As in like personality, as in
Well,
one
I mean,
style of
so,
flow?
no. It's not about flow at all. It's so what works for me will never work for you.
Mm,
Nature, nurture, genetics, epigenetics, like it does. There's if it's also the same thing in the supplement industry. If somebody comes along and tries to sell you something that is not based on caffeine, meaning coffee or tea, marijuana or nicotine, they're lying. Those are the only supplements that evolution shaped us to work with cognitively over eons. Everything else, look at a map of the human hormonal system. Just pull up a map of the endocrine system. Look where it starts, look where it ends, look at how many steps go in between, and try to tell me that a supplement is going to make it through. We just don't know enough, and you're different than me. So I'm not saying supplements are all bad. I'm saying there's no way that one works for everyone. It just, unless we co-evolved with it, the systems don't work that way. We're individuals, right? So for example, you have a bunch of different dopamine receptors, but a lot of the conversation we're having has to do with the reactivity of D3 and D4, dopamine 3 and dopamine 4. And they think that people who are really good at flow actually have low functioning dopamine receptors. So we get and less high than other people naturally and have to seek more extreme highs through flow, right? So less momentary pleasure. So you got to go for the really big pleasure. One way to, and there's biology under this, and I know this, this is a case with me, and it runs in my family. So one way you can look for this is if you're not susceptible to anything that is consciousness altering. So like psychedelics, for example, I need massive quantities of psychedelics to have any real effect. But when I go in and have surgery, of which I've had a lot, I have to tell the doctors, hey, give me way more morphine because my opiate receptors are really turned down and I'm going to need, otherwise I come out of surgery screaming. My mother is the exact same way. It's a genetic thing. There's a term in the psychedelic culture for it. They call it a hard head, but it's basically a genetic hardwiring thing that lowers your susceptibility to certain pleasure chemicals.
got it. So if I understand this correctly, it's just like what we're saying is you got to look at the biology and figure out something that's personalized to you. It's not a one size fit all.
The biology is what scales. Biology is the only thing that is one size fits all. That's the only, that's, if it's shaped by, why does flow work? Because it's what evolution shaped our brain, how it shaped our brain to perform at our best. And right. And so there's often, not everybody, there seems to be a sequence of progression to learning, just like there are stages in adult development and we start out as kids, right? We move, right? All these things seem to work as on a somewhat of a progression. There's way more research needs to be done, and I don't want to be too speculative.
Perfect. So I think I got a really good question that will tie this up here, and it comes from Ray here, and he's asking about are specific things are there specific things to do before starting a task, like writing the chapter of a book that helps trigger the flow state? And
Yeah.
To add to that, it sounds to me like the whole conversation of flow states is there's a sense of temporary, or it's like you untap, you pop open a can of productivity. So is this the case, and what could be some of those activities?
So let me sort of just tell you what's inside Zero to Dangerous, because this will answer all your questions and more. Zero to Dangerous is really four things. It is an introduction to the history of peak performance, starting with Nietzsche, literally, who's the first high performance philosopher, going to now. So this is the big crystal. It's an hour of history, basically, just so you have the understanding of this is the history of the story. This is what we're going to cover, right? And then you have positive psychology has come up with 6 or 7 different things over the past 20 years that are really great at producing flow, right? This is Csikszentmihalyi's work. This is Martin Seligman's work, really smart thinkers working on this. So you start with the positive psychology thing. What the neuroscience, what the biology has told us is there are 22 flow triggers, right? They all drive attention into the present moment. That's what they do essentially under the hood, all drive flow. Which triggers you're susceptible to versus I'm susceptible to, that's what's individual. With the triggers work across the boards, they shift brain function. Which ones are going to work? Novelty may work better for you than, say, risk or than blah, 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 that sort of thing. And then on the back end, and this gets to the question you were asking, flow is not a binary. It doesn't work like a light switch. You're not in the zone or out of the zone. It's a cycle. It's a 4-stage process. And there's different neurobiology changes in the brain underneath each, and the body underneath each step. And you have to move through the entire cycle completely. So I don't think I told this story in Habit of Ferocity, but about once a month, somebody will come up to me and they're like, dude, you got to study me. I'm in flow all the time. And, for the first couple of years, I never knew what to say to this. I was, thank you very much. And finally I just started telling the truth. I was like, we have a word for this. We call this schizophrenia. So you can't actually be in flow all the time. The only way you're in flow all the time is mania or schizophrenia. It doesn't work that way. And then it's really excessive dopamine, and it's not even flow. It just feels like flow. So it's problematic. You have to move through the entire cycle, and some of the states are very flowy, and some of the stages are very unpleasant. And there's a recovery stage on the back end, etc. And one of the reasons we spend so much time on grit in the Habit of Ferocity is the first stage of the flow cycle is known as struggle. And it was named that for a reason. Literally, you cannot get into flow without having a really hard stress response and leaning into it immediately. So what did we do in the Habit of Ferocity? We taught you to have a very hard stress response and lean in immediately in microseconds. That's the difference between getting into flow and plateauing for months and months and months. That instinct. So everything we did in the Habit of Ferocity was designed so that when you're in the struggle phase of the flow cycle and that opportunity arises, and I'll give you a really simple example from action sports because it's really funny, but it's really true. Mountain biking is a fairly violent sport. It just is. The terrain shakes you apart, especially true in downhill where it's very violent. Invariably, what will happen, this is a bliss junkie problem with flow. People get in, have a downhill session, day one, Saturday, they go riding, deep flow state. And at night, they forget how hard they worked to get into flow, and they just remember the blissful high of the flow state. And the next morning, they're like, oh, I'm going to go out for a flowy ride. And the violence of the terrain explodes you, and you tend to go to the hospital. Like it throws people. They're looking for a flowy, how they think it felt. And what actually got you there was when the challenge showed up and you met it with aggression. If you try to meet challenge with flow, you're going to the hospital on a downhill mountain bike. So it's an extreme example, but it's really common. And people talk about it in action sports as just don't do this. You gotta meet challenge with aggression in that instant. That's the gateway. And there's Gregory Burns, who's at Emory, he's a neuroscientist at Emory, wrote a really meaningful, he did some of the foundational work on dopamine back in the 90s, but he wrote a book called Satisfaction where he lays out a theory for one of the early neurochemical theories for flow. And he has argued that you need testosterone on the front end of a flow state, right? The macho male hormone, right? The fighting hormone. That when that challenge rises up, that what I'm actually been training people to do in the Habit of Ferocity, if Greg is right, is actually meet that challenge with a testosterone burst that gets you through in it. Because that allows you to take all that energy, all that focus, and put it into the task. And if you do that, that is the focus that drives flow. So it really does stack up really neatly right up against each other. So I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I want to tie in is somebody on Facebook, and unfortunately I don't have the name since I just had a note of the question, was asking about what happens if there's too much dopamine in the system. It seems like a chemical imbalance can get you in serious trouble. I think you've answered that, mentioning that if you got too much dopamine, you're talking schizophrenia at this point.
Mania. I don't know how mania and schizophrenia are related. I don't know if anybody does. I don't work on the illness side of this coin, so I'm speaking a little out of turn here, but they're very related. And it doesn't, like, we have shirts at the Flow Research Collective that say never trust the dopamine. And right, like, you never want to go shopping with a lot of dopamine in your system because it fires up pattern recognition and everything looks good. You'll buy everything. That's what a shopping spree is. That's what shopaholics are. That's what gambling addiction is. That's what porn addiction is. That's what, if anybody listening has that experienced phantom phone ring where your pocket buzzes and you think it's your phone ringing and it's not ringing. That's your brain wanting the dopamine of the message, right? And so it's creating the feeling of, oh, message here, and it's trying to get you fake dopamine. That's literally your brain being a drug addict every time you feel a phantom buzzing, which is incredible, I know.
That is fascinating. And Oh my God. So now you've brought up the topic of addiction here. And so even by going through the habit of ferocity, are we saying that you're basically getting a lot more resilience against these
Yeah.
susceptibilities?
So I have said, and people hate me when they say this out loud, but a tremendous amount of life is addiction management. Habits are what we're laying in neurochemicals. These are addictive neurochemicals, and we're creating habit patterns. And when we don't execute our habit, we're not getting our drug, right? Nobody likes to say it out loud. First of all, there's an industry that wants to say addiction is a sickness so they can, right? Like there's a whole thing going on. And look, a lot of smart people have weighed in on this, but from a peak performance standpoint, peak performance is a lot about addiction management. It's why is the habit of ferocity so important? Why do you have to have massively transformative purpose, high hard goals, clear goals, so you're not derailed by the addictive neurochemistry? What seems to happen in high flow lifestyles over time, and you see this a lot in peak performance. You see this a lot in great athletes with long careers. Tom Brady is a fantastic example. They stay very even. And it's because they don't want to, they talk about, you'll hear them say, yeah, the low's really bad. I don't want to like get too caught up in the lows aren't the problem. The highs are the problem. Every successful person in the world has learned how to turn pain into work. Right? You can't have a career without learning how to turn pain into work. That's what the habit of ferocity, in a sense, is. Take all the crap that's in your life and turn it into a force for good. Change your life, right? Use it to propel yourself that way. If you can't manage the dopamine along the way, you can't do this. The real problem for most athletes is the highs. So I won't ride a flow high very high. And this is also the key to making flow sustainable over time. So flow is a complicated neurochemical panoply. Dopamine's underneath a lot of it. Dopamine's a very short-lived chemical, 20-minute shelf life in the brain at peak concentration, right? So if you like the high in a flow state so much that you exhaust your entire dopamine supply, you're going to have no dopamine the next day, the next day, the next day. So you can't go from flow state to flow state to flow state. You're going to struggle too much. So part of the secret, one of the reasons you want the habit of ferocity in there is it's addiction management. I'm teaching you that there's something better in your life than the super high. I'm trying to train you, right? Like there's nothing, I can't teach it to you. I can tell it to you, right? But until you've experienced it and you're like, oh my God, going for my dreams and my goals and doing this long-term every day, that's more rewarding than the high. Yes, actually it is. But until you've had that experience, we're pleasure-based beings. Like you won't believe me. I can't, right? Your knowledge is not stronger than addiction. Otherwise we wouldn't have AA.
Man, listening to you is so fascinating, and I can see the importance of habit of ferocity. It's like the most solid character building process in the fact that you're going to go and explore these like really magical things. So it's kind of like playing with magic, but you don't want to sway into the dark side.
Exactly. It's I'll tell you something funny. So if you want to all the way back, if you want to know where a lot of this started for me. So I grew up Jewish, and I went to my rabbi. I was 18, 17. And I said, Rabbi, teach me about Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, right? And he said, no, I won't. You're not 40 years old. You're not a Torah and Talmud scholar. You're not prepared. I won't do it. And I got so mad, I wrote my first novel about everything I discovered about Kabbalah, right? So I'm a bad person to piss off because I'm going to learn it anyhow. But that said, a lot of religions have prescriptions like that. And once you kind of, there's this thing that people do in the field of altered states where they look at holy texts and you strip out the politics and you strip out the sociology and you strip out the culture, you strip out the history, and you left with the technology, the biological technology. What are they doing to alter consciousness? And so if you read Stealing Fire, I gave an example right out of Kabbalah where an Israeli neuroscientist teamed up with the world's leading Kabbalah expert, and they looked at one specific Jewish meditation that tended to produce one specific doppelganger experience where you see your double. And they figured out exactly what is the neurobiology and how does this meditative thing access it, right? the whole point is underneath all these states are the same kind of addictive neurochemistry. And I think what my rabbi was trying to say is, hey, dude, until you actually have some addiction management skills, I could teach you this shit, but it's going to blow up your life and you're going to have real problems. So we have a culture that says no. And okay, well, that's fair. And if you would have actually told me that at the time, I might have been like, all right, cool, I'll go learn this other stuff, right? But no, you just said no. And like, I know doesn't work for me. But no with a, hey, man, like the addictions are going to mess up your life. You can't handle the dopamine. If I was smart enough at 18 to figure out what the hell he was talking about, I might have listened, maybe.
I would think that your wiser self now seems to have said that, but I don't know if at 18 we would have done the same here.
Yeah, man.
I want to refer back to Ray's question about the book and just go full circle. It seems like you were looking for that personality prescription on what gets you in a flow state to write that book, but it's all individualistically based.
Oh, so you asked that, yeah. So.
And also I want to ask another question that you'll address, I know, at the same time, from Steven Stella asking, okay, so to get into flow, I'm supposed to like hurl myself down a mountain or paddle a boat so I can peak at work or in my life mission. And I think, I'll let you elaborate on that.
So there are 22 flow triggers, as I mentioned. There are 12 of them are individual triggers and 10 of them are group triggers. So there's group flow, the shared collective version of experience. So when I work with organizations, and we do an organizational version of Zero to Dangerous, it's we focus more on the group flow triggers. In Zero to Dangerous, it's more on the individual triggers. So this is the answer to your question. Some of the triggers are really great to deploy when you're in the struggle phase. Some are really good to deploy when you're in flow because they lengthen flow. Some of them are, right? And the answer is no, you don't actually have to hurl yourself down mountains at all. In fact, just talking about risk is a flow trigger because it's a focusing mechanism, but social risk and physical risk are processed by the exact same neurobiological structures. The brain can't tell the difference between social fear and physical danger. And the reason is, if you go back 300 years ago and you got ostracized by your tribe, got kicked out, right? It was a capital crime. You couldn't live without other people. You would have gotten eaten or killed or whatever. So the brain processes social screw-ups in the same place it processes physical screw-ups. So, for example, you don't have to take a physical risk. If you're really shy, you just have to go ask a stranger for the time to get a little bit of that. I mean, literally, like when I train up risk, we take shy people and, your job is ask somebody for the time, today, tomorrow it's 2 people. And we take, 2 people who are really outgoing. And the goal is to tell a stranger something personal about yourself that other people don't know on day one, right? It's totally individual. You start, I always say with surfing, like Laird Hamilton doesn't wake up till the waves are 50 feet tall. I'm wide awake at 5 feet. Right? Like it's totally individual. That's what I mean by individual, which level of social, but it is a giant misnomer that flow belongs to action sport athletes at all. In fact, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, conducted a giant survey looking for high flow environments. And the 2 things that topped the list outside of some sports stuff was Montessori education and conversations between middle managers at work. Not a group of people you would ever think, but some of this is flow. This is why the other thing covered in the Habit of Ferocity is the neurobiology of flow, the phenomena. How does it make you feel, right? Why does it make you feel that way? What's really going on in the brain and the body? So, it's the same thing we talked about in a Habit of Ferocity. I want you to have cognitive literacy, right? Understanding what's going on in the brain and the body when we're performing at our best. And I want maps and models. What is the big picture, overarching structure? So this is your Christmas tree. And then you can hang all your little ornaments on it and you can hold everything in your head. And you can also understand where the boundaries are, right? Because there's a lot of nonsense out there about flow, right? And there's a lot of people trying to sell people things around flow. For example, everybody's got a technology that puts people into flow. And flow, if you look at what flow is neurobiologically, neurochemically, and physiologically, it's 11 to 12 different things going on in the brain and the body that we know of, and probably way more. So if you have a technology that gets at, say, neural electricity, Well, it's 1 out of 12 things that's going on. It's not really flow. It's a very thin substitute. It's like cocaine is not really flow. It feels a little flowy, but you're not experiencing peak performance. You're not producing concertos and masterpieces and visionary ideas, right? But it sure feels that way.
Geez, and what I'd love you to do real quick, Stephen, is tell us a bit more about like this zero to dangerous. Like, what will it do for me now that I've done habit of ferocity? Like, and I start acting slow. Like, what will I get out of that? Because you say it's like you've heard
Yeah.
these things, like technologies. What is this going to do?
So, we really, really, really laid it on a motivational foundation, right? Grit, motivation, goal setting. That's what you get out of the habit of what you get with flow is a massive increase in productivity, a massive increase in creativity, and a massive increase in learning, and a massive increase in meaning. There are other things that happen. One of the other, couple other things, just fun things about flow. Flow increases empathy over time. It also increases what psychologists call ecological awareness. So we start to notice more of the natural world and to start to have empathy extends the boundaries of species. So we start to care more about nature. These are just other things that happen over time in flow. But the big ones are, McKinsey did a 10-year study and they found that productivity goes up about 500% in flow. Work by the Department of Defense on flow shows that learning can accelerate like 240, 250% in flow. Work done by my organization in partnership with some folks at USC and the Center for Science and Performance in Science, along with some work at Harvard and some work at the University of Sydney, have showed that creativity spikes 400 to 700% in flow. So these are all so if you look at what are so-called 21st century skills, right? All the things we need to thrive in the 21st century, we've got a really good list. It's creativity, innovation, collaboration, cooperation, a couple other things. These are all the accelerated learning. These are all the things that are amplified by flow. So what it's, and the reason that they're called 21st century skills and the reason we're focused on them is for the past 300 years, we've gotten very good at training up skill sets. We have neglected states of consciousness. But if you want accelerated learning, if you want more creativity, if you want better collaboration, cooperation, those sorts of things, evolution shaped our brain to change states to produce that. So you want states, not skills. So we've got phenomenal tools, but they're skills. The next thing in the education is states. States are more dangerous, right? It's not for everybody. You need the habit of ferocity foundation, I think, to do this long term, stably, and really get where you want to go. But I think the two together are kind of a magnificent combination. And the other thing is that the coaches who work along with everybody in the habit of ferocity, we don't just work with everybody's a PhD psychologist. They're all licensed psychologists, most of whom who have deep expertise in flow, right? Some of the same people that people have been working with along the way in habit of ferocity. I don't know if they've been working with them along the way. We've been using the Facebook group. Sorry, brain freeze. Ignore me. Talk to Jason for a second. My brain died.
Well, what I want to do for right now for people is that, as you notice, like getting into the flow state, the zero to danger is not for everyone, and there is some foundational work to be done. And you are talking about playing a bit with magic. So what we've done is we've actually set up to the fact that you'll be able to have a call with someone that can have a conversation with you to see like what are your reasons why you want to trigger these flow states, if you're the right kind of person to be in this program. So I did post up a link, and what I'd love to do, Stephen, for the rest of the call is that there's a ton of good questions that came in, and if you still have questions, please post them up. I just saw there was so many that came in that I had to take a moment here to kind of gather them. But for those who are listening to this, you feel compelled to go into these explorations of flow states. You feel like the zero to dangerous might be the right next step for you. You've done the habit of ferocity. Go ahead and book that call in the link that I just posted in the chat. You can go ahead and book a call with Ryan. He's on Stephen's team. He'll be able to listen a bit more about what is it that you're trying to achieve and at least guide you in the right direction. And from what I understand, Stephen, here is like there's some people here that flow state training is definitely not the answer. And how would you define that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because in a sense, one, the time, it's not a mild time commitment along the way, right? That and we want you to come out the other side dangerous. So one, can this fit into your life? Two, a lot of it is like, is the habit of ferocity, that's the stuff we're looking for. Is that stuff cemented in? Are you solid with it? That's really, really important, because I don't want people to blow themselves up along the way, right? I want everybody to get exactly where they're going as fast as possible with as little damage as possible, and having as much fun along the way as possible. And that's, it's, sometimes the conversation is no more than, okay, this is probably right for you, but why don't you put 6 months in more work and then come back and talk to us then? Some of it's that, stuff like that. It's just really, really good to gauge where people are, because I want everybody to come out the other end dangerous, but not for everyone.
Love it. So if you are curious, you've been loving this conversation so far, do click on that, and I'll be emailing this link to everybody right after this webinar. I first want to acknowledge Kate. Thank you for sharing that story about yourself. Your kind of athletic past kind of brought you into that same story of facing that reality with the biological advantage, but it sounds like you're doing all the work now. You're a student here at Mind Valley, so appreciate you being here and sharing. I also wanted to get here a question here from Regina Joseph. So people experiencing flow in mentally intensive situations do not have the spike, right? It's managed over time and therefore no low stage. So I think I would re-ask this question like this, Stephen, is that once you understand flow and you use it properly, are you saying that you're not allowing yourself to get to certain highs that you would untrained? And does it prevent the crash?
Nothing prevents the high, nothing prevents the crash, because that's biology. What you discover, though, is you stop minding the crash, because what used to be a crash is now, oh, this is the biology, and there's reasons for it. Like there's the crash. So the flow cycle maps onto what's been called the creativity cycle. Same stages, and for very good reasons, right? The last stage of the creativity cycle is what's known as verification, meaning I just had this huge, great idea. It's fantastic. Now I need to check it, right? And I always say that if there's in Mind Valley kind of communities, if there's a danger in these communities, it's that people see insight as the beginning, as a reason to change their life. Insight is the reason to do more research. It's not the reason to change your life. Insight is the starting point for research, not the starting point for change, right? And I think what happens on the back end of a flow state is you get this big high, you have all these great innovative ideas, and then all the feel-good neurochemistry is gone. So I use it as a writer. When I'm on the back end of my flow state in a recovery phase, I will reread what I wrote. Now, I won't try to edit it because I don't have any of the neurochemistry do the editing. But if I like it still, without any feel-good neurochemistry in my system, it's actually good. It has to be good, because there's nothing artificial to make me like it, right? So it's a very, I think, and this is just my opinion, this is not scientific fact, but evolution tends to be fairly smart when humans are optimized for innovation, and having a refractory period on the back end of innovation where you check your work is an interesting adaptation. I'm not saying this is real. I'm saying this is how I use it. I find it useful, but I kind of do think that this is what evolution did. I think it's serving a biological, I have no idea how to prove that, but that's my hypothesis.
But it seems like there's definitely some different strategies for each of these stages, which is what you learn in this process.
That's exactly right. And there's and to answer your question though, I don't think the highs, so this is, so you've had this experience. I'm sure people listening have. Sometimes you get a big high, and you're talking about it, you're excited, and then it slips from what is going on right now into what does this high mean for the future? Because this happened, oh, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And then when you crash the next day, it's not just like the high went away, it's all the things that were attached. This is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this, and it's very demotivating, right? What seems to go away over time is the projection that comes out of flow, right? flow becomes a very useful action state, and it becomes the thing that makes life meaningful, but it doesn't lead to as much magical thinking. The magical thinking tends to go away over time, and that tends to be part of the addiction management. I think that's the answer to your question. I also think there's way more research to be done.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it correlates to a lot of other things that I feel we've been exposed to within Mind Valley as well, which is just like the meanings you create around the state that you felt and all these stories that you felt. If those stories come crashing down in a different stage, then it's like you've double amplified the pain and things like that. So really interesting kind of notice, and it seems to correlate with a lot of other things that I know I've been exposed to as well. Um, I have another good question.
No, keep going. Your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say we got Gautam here who asked a few questions here, and one of them I think is we've touched on it already, but we're kind of going to have it directed. It's how does one handle manic depressive addictive traits from the dark side of flow while pursuing massively transformational purposes?
Well, my answer hasn't changed. I would do the habit of ferocity first, and then I would study flow. Yeah, I like, that's what the habit of ferocity is, a flow primer, right? It obviously like no, but you don't need flow on top of it. It's going to make your life significantly better. In terms of motivation and grit and goal setting. That's a lot of amplification. So I think it stands alone, but it really is about laying in that foundation so that when there are long periods without flow, you can persevere through them. And things along those lines. So like addiction management is really, some of it is simple mindfulness, right? Breath work. If you get a gap in between thought and emotion, right, and you have some freedom and choice in there, that is also addiction management, right? And I think I don't know how other people have this experience. This is a very personality kind of statement, so I'm hedging a bet. But like everything that I've encountered that I have had an addictive relationship with, and this could be a relationship, this could be a company, a startup, this could be like take your pick. It doesn't matter. I've been addicted to everything you could possibly imagine being addicted to at one point or another. And they're all different negotiations, right? I don't think there's one answer. I think addiction management is that like it's an ongoing process, and I on a lot of levels, I think that might be what we talk about in terms of like growing up and things like. I mean, like we have really commonsensical terms for these things, but so it's nobody's telling you that the process of growing up is actually a process of addiction management. Then I would have seen the value of it.
It's this whole idea of attachment, right? Like it's all of it's rooted in attachment. I just want to open a caveat. I know, like, I love a quote from Russell Brand in his book Recovery, which is like, we're all somewhere along the scale of addiction. So it doesn't need to be labeled as something bad. There's all things that we get attachments to. And I guess it's a management of this at the same time.
I think one of the things that's great about flow, you asked about what actually flow brings, is one of the things I think that flow brings is it puts every other, in my experience, addiction into perspective, because flow is a better high. Like there's nothing you could be addicted to flow is the most neurochemicals you can get. It's the biggest brain reaction. It's the best high out there. And this is Csikszentmihalyi's quote, not mine. He said, unlike every other addiction that leads backwards, flow, because it requires skill progression and mastery, leads forwards. And it's an addiction that leads towards progress, whereas every other one leads backwards. I don't know if every other addiction leads backwards. I'm sure there are exceptions to those rules. I'm wary of those kind of blanket statements. But he's right? Like he's generally right.
Yeah, and even bring that forward would you even see like being able to access these states of flow as a way of overcoming these other issues in your life? And I know that's maybe a loaded question.
So I will flat out, I will tell you that there are a variety of treatment centers for a lot of different things, ranging from PTSD to juvenile delinquency to drug and alcohol addiction, that have flow-based curriculums as large part of what they do. And they've had, the ones I've had contact with have better than normal success rates. That said, I'm just going by what they told me. I've not been under the hood on their data. I haven't experienced their programs. I have no idea. I'm just going on about what I've heard. So that work has been going on. It's the best research is in PTSD. There we have actual really great research done by the U.S. Army at Camp Pendleton that was talked about in Stealing Fire, where they used flow plus talk therapy to treat over 1,000 patients with PTSD, and they found that a combination of flow state, regular surfing sessions, actually to access flow, and talk therapy sessions. I think they were doing it 3 times a week. Over 5 weeks was enough to significantly reduce or completely cure symptoms of PTSD. So by significantly reduce, meaning the meds they were taking dropped significantly, almost off their meds kind of thing, or were done. So we have good data on flow and PTSD, but again, it's still at the start of the study, and that's surfing. Would it work with other, like there's a lot of intellectual ways of getting into flow. Would that be as potent as surfing? We don't know. Nobody's done that work yet. Interesting.
Really interesting. And man, this whole conversation, for everybody listening, do you realize we've already been 53 minutes on this call? And speaking of flow, it seems like the whole call has been flowing. Time has been warped, and it's just been a fascinating conversation. For those of you who are here, I'd love to just hear your feedback. How are you guys liking it? I've tried to answer as many of the questions that I saw had a bit of a unique twist to it, and I think we've answered most of them. There was one that was very specific to a flow profile. I don't know if this will be a long one to answer, but Gabriella asked if there's any advice for flow profile deep thinker to overcome perfectionism and overthinking.
Yes. I guess I'll start at the top. I was trying to figure out if I wanted to go bottom up or top down. It's a great question. It's a really smart question, because those are, forget the flow profile deep thinker. Just for anybody who's academically minded, creatively minded, this is a overthinking and perfectionism can be difficult. And so one of the things that I think this is across the boards in peak performers, is they learn how to make decisions quickly. And the way to do that is, especially if you are a perfectionist and if you are overthinking, is you're in Zero to Dangerous. One of the things we're going to talk about is a clear goal list. We talked about a little bit of that in the Habit of Ferocity. We'll add to it. Clear goal lists are how you get past that, because they're how you declare victory. You have to overcome perfectionism and overthinking. You need to, before you enter into the project, figure out what your win is. Figure out exactly where you're going to go. And then when you get there, you got to make your decision. You have to commit to making your decision, and you have to train it. You have to train yourself up. And perfectionism, I will tell you, I'm a perfectionist, and I've written 11 books at this point, and there's flaws in every one of them. In other words, at some point, you just have to learn to get over yourself. Nothing is ever going to be perfect. And I will tell you flat out, the experience of writing a book is invariably, this is awful, this is awful, this is awful, this is awful. Oh my God, it's amazing. Oh, it's fucking perfect. And then like 6 months go by and you pick it up and you're like, oh yeah, that I would have done that differently. I should have, by the way, if I could take Last Tango in Cyberspace, my new novel, off the shelves, I let my editor talk me into changing the first 3 pages, and boy, would I change them back. And I'm a perfectionist, you know what you just got to learn to it's really about, this is addiction management as well. We're having the same conversation, right? Perfectionism is a kind of addiction management. And you have to cut it off. Okay. Right. My wife is a very slow, calculated decision maker, because she works with sick animals and lives are on the line, and she wants as much information as possible, because one bad decision, an animal can die. And because we work with hospice care and special needs care animals. But when that decision-making process comes into normal life, like when we need to buy a new stove, No, come on. Like, it's not okay. Like, it doesn't know. Please, God. Like, seriously, lives are not on the line. There's a 30-day return policy.
I love it. I think we've all faced a bit of that as well. I just want to direct everybody because we are running out of time. Stephen, you've been amazing on this call. Everybody joining, you've been awesome. I have set that link up again. If you still have questions, just go ahead and book that call with Ryan. He's going to have a conversation with you. He can answer some of your questions and just get curious about it. If you are curious about flow states and Zero to Dangerous has some appeal to you, there's no commitments from booking the call, but you will have an amazing conversation. I absolutely love Ryan, and I'm so curious about this program as well. And I just want to give a kind of just a 2 minute of gratitude to you, Stephen. I went through Habit of Ferocity. I particularly love the parts where I actually started tying in together my curiosities, passions, and purpose, and it really started giving me a lot of direction in my life because I'm kind of good at everything, but I never had that really stacked up. And once I went through that and started doing things, it gave me the easy decision to move here to Miami. I love doing these talks, getting on interviews. This is really where I light up, and a lot of that has been the clarity that I gained by going through your quest. And so I'm in immense gratitude to you and everything that you do. And I know Zero to Dangerous is just as phenomenal of a program after you've done the foundation. So for everybody here, thank you for being here. Go and check out, book that call. I see a lot of thank yous, so I'm going to put that link one more time, and you can see there's an email coming out. Book that call with Ryan. You're going to have a good time. And Stephen, I'd love to open the floor, maybe let you say some closing words before you head out.
Yeah, I like, it's just a joy to see so many people tuning in from all over the world. It's just wonderful. And I hope you found the Habit of Ferocity. Like Jason, it's great to hear those comments. That's exciting. That was my own experience. Just right. I say personality doesn't scale, so I don't often talk about this. But there was a point in my life where I suddenly got that stack right, and you can tell because I went from putting out a book every 5 years to putting out a book every year. Like they were like, that's what happened. I got that right. But it's exciting. It's, you know, if you could want to share in the comments, if anybody's got other things out of the Habit of Ferocity, I'd love to hear about it. I'm always looking for feedback. But that's exciting. And Zero to Dangerous is amazing. And Rian and the other people on my team are all just wonderful to talk to. And you will end up learning just a ton about yourself and ending up, they make more friends for life out of these calls. It's a little freaky, but anyways, you'll have fun talking to my team, even if you're a little curious.
Stephen, I think you've just made me realize that I've been calling him Ryan and he never corrected me because his name is Rian.
Rian. Yeah, he'll never correct you. But he's Irish, right? He'll say something, you know, he'll just be polite about it and funny.
Oh, man. Wow. And so everybody book that call. You're going to have a ton of fun. And if you want to leave your comments about Habit of Ferocity, go in the Facebook group because the comments here are not going to live. Go in the Facebook group and just see if it's like Stephen will have a chance to read those and I'll be able to pass them to him as well.
Thanks, man.
Stephen, thanks for everything. Everybody, thank you for being here. Check out that link. Check out Zero to Dangerous. I'm seeing the claps happen. So Kate, Kristen, thank you for being on the call, and everybody else, we will close this. Have a good evening. Have a good day. Have a good morning.
Bye, everybody.